The Vietnam War is often remembered through the lens of political strategy and battlefield maps, but beneath the official history lies a much darker, deeply unsettling reality. This wasn't just a war fought with soldiers and rifles. It was a descent into an absolute psychological nightmare that permanently scarred the earth and fractured the human soul. For more than a decade, the dense, humid jungles of Southeast Asia became a breeding ground for unimaginable horrors. Where the weather itself was weaponized, the dead were engineered to haunt the living, and the sky rained down a toxic chemical plague that still deforms innocent children generations later. From top-secret military operations that pushed the boundaries of cruelty to the heartbreaking plight of thousands of displaced orphans, the sheer scale of suffering is almost too heavy to comprehend. In this video, we are pulling back the curtain on the most terrifying, deeply buried truths of the conflict. Prepare yourself, because these aren't just historical footnotes. These are 10 shocking facts about the Vietnam War that will completely haunt your understanding of history. Number 10. The Ghost Tape. Psychological warfare during the conflict took a deeply eerie turn with a U.S. military operation known as Operation Wandering Soul. Grounded in the traditional Vietnamese belief that a person must be buried in their homeland or their soul will wander in eternal pain and torment, American forces sought to exploit this profound spiritual vulnerability. Engineers and audio experts meticulously recorded spooky, distorted sounds, eerie music, and voices that represented deceased National Liberation Front soldiers calling out to their living comrades to surrender and return home before it was too late. These recordings, heavily altered to sound supernatural, were blasted through large amplifiers mounted on helicopters or carried by backpacks into the dark, dense jungles at night. The terrifying audio tracks included the weeping of women, the screams of children, and the haunting warnings of a dead man, urging his friends to flee the battlefield. While some soldiers recognized the sounds as a crude American trick, the psychological toll on exhausted, isolated troops hiding in the pitch-black wilderness was immensely draining, creating a lingering atmosphere of dread that amplified the natural horrors of the nighttime jungle. Number 9. Project Popeye. The weaponization of weather became a terrifying reality through a highly classified military espionage operation designed to manipulate nature itself. Operating under the code name Project Popeye, the U.S. military launched a covert weather modification initiative over the Ho Chi Minh Trail. The primary goal of this operation was to deliberately prolong the monsoon season over critical supply routes used by North Vietnamese forces. Special transport planes flew thousands of secret missions, seeding the clouds with silver iodide and lead iodide particles. This chemical intervention caused a massive increase in rainfall, triggering catastrophic mudslides, washing away vital roads, destroying river crossings, and completely disrupting the enemy's logistics. The project was kept strictly secret from both the American public and international authorities, as experimenting with environmental warfare carried immense political risk. It demonstrated a chilling willingness to use the Earth's natural systems as a blunt military instrument, altering regional weather patterns for years before the program was eventually exposed to the world by investigative journalists. Number 8. The secret bombing of Laos. While public attention was heavily focused on the fighting inside Vietnam, neighboring Laos secretly became the most heavily bombed country in human history per capita. In an effort to completely destroy the hidden supply networks of the Ho Chi Minh Trail that snaked through Lao territory, the U.S. military carried out a massive clandestine bombing campaign known as Operation Barrel Roll and Operation Steel Tiger. Over a 9-year period, millions of tons of explosives were dropped onto the countryside, averaging a plane load of bombs every 8 minutes, 24 hours a day. This staggering onslaught was hidden from the American Congress and public for years, operating entirely in the shadows of the broader war. The sheer scale of destruction devastated countless rural villages and left behind a horrific landscape filled with unexploded submunitions. The tragedy persists to this day, as millions of these unstable cluster bombs remain buried in the soil, continuously claiming the lives and limbs of innocent Lao farmers and children decades after the combat officially ended. Number 7. Operation Babylift. As the fall of Saigon became completely inevitable in the spring of 1975, a frantic, highly emotional mass evacuation was ordered to rescue thousands of orphaned children from the war zone. Dubbed Operation Babylift, The mission aimed to fly these vulnerable infants and children out of the collapsing country to adoptive families in the United States, Australia, and Europe. However, the historic initiative began with an absolute disaster when the very first flight, utilizing a massive military transport plane, suffered a catastrophic explosive decompression shortly after takeoff. The rear cargo doors blew apart, severing essential control cables and forcing the pilot to make a desperate crash landing in a nearby rice paddy. The violent impact ripped the aircraft into pieces, killing over 100 children and adult escorts in an instant. Despite the profound grief and horror of this opening tragedy, the operation desperately pushed forward, ultimately evacuating over 3,000 children to safety, though it remains forever shadowed by the heartbreaking loss of innocent young lives on that first chaotic day. Number 6. The Agent Orange Legacy. The deployment of tactical chemical herbicides during the conflict created an environmental and humanitarian disaster that continues to impact generations. Seeking to strip away the dense jungle canopy that provided natural cover for guerrilla forces, millions of gallons of a defoliant known as Agent Orange were sprayed across vast stretches of the countryside. The chemical mixture contained high concentrations of dioxin, a highly toxic substance that quickly saturated the local ecosystem, poisoned water supplies, and entered the food chain. The immediate result was the total destruction of millions of acres of pristine forests and crucial agricultural fields. But the long-term human cost was far more devastating. Millions of individuals developed severe illnesses, cancers, and neurological disorders. Most tragically, the toxic damage altered the genetic health of exposed parents, leading to an incredibly high rate of severe birth defects, physical deformities, and chronic illnesses in children born generations after the final helicopter sprayed the chemical. Number 5. The Kuchi Tunnels. Beneath the blood-soaked battlefields of the countryside lay an incredibly complex, sprawling subterranean world that redefined the nature of guerrilla combat. The National Liberation Front constructed an immense network of underground tunnels, stretching for hundreds of miles, directly underneath the feet of unsuspecting American bases. These narrow, claustrophobic passageways were designed to withstand heavy artillery barrages and housed entire communities, complete with living quarters, medical hospitals, weapons factories, storage facilities, and command centers. For Western soldiers, these tunnels became an absolute nightmare, guarded by ingenious, lethal booby traps made from sharpened bamboo stakes, tripwires connected to grenades, and venomous snakes hidden in the dark. A specialized group of volunteer soldiers known as tunnel rats had to crawl into the tight pitch-black spaces armed with nothing but a flashlight and a handgun. Facing intense psychological terror and brutal hand-to-hand combat in a dark world where death waited around every corner. Number 4. Project 100,000. In a highly controversial move to meet the intense manpower demands of the expanding conflict, the U.S. Department of Defense launched a social experiment known as Project 100,000. Under this initiative, the military drastically lowered its mental and medical standards for induction, drafting men who had previously been classified as unfit for service due to low IQ scores or significant learning disabilities. Promoted under the guise of offering educational opportunities and social advancement to underprivileged individuals, the reality of the program was grim and unforgiving. The vast majority of these recruits, often referred to as McNamara's morons by critics, were quickly funneled directly into high-risk combat roles on the front lines. Lacking the cognitive ability to fully grasp the complex tactical training required to survive in a hostile jungle environment, these men suffered casualty and death rates that were significantly higher than those of typical soldiers, leading many historians to view the project as a tragic exploitation of vulnerable citizens. Number 3. The My Lai Massacre. The darkest stain on the modern history of the conflict occurred in the small village of My Lai, where American soldiers committed an unspeakable atrocity against unarmed civilians, sent on a search and destroy mission under the mistaken belief that the village was a major enemy stronghold. A company of soldiers completely lost control, embarking on a multi-hour rampage of mass murder, sexual violence, and systemic destruction. Hundreds of innocent villagers, primarily defenseless women, elderly men, and young infants, were rounded up and executed in cold blood. The horrifying violence was finally halted when a courageous military helicopter pilot, Hugh Thompson, intervened by landing his aircraft between the advancing soldiers and the surviving civilians, ordering his crew to open fire on their own comrades if the slaughter continued. High-ranking military officials immediately attempted a massive cover-up to hide the incident from the world, but the shocking truth eventually leaked to the press, utterly shattering public support for the war effort. Number 2. The enormous toll of unexploded ordnance. The sheer volume of explosives dropped during the conflict created a terrifying, permanent danger that outlasted the actual fighting by many decades. Millions of tons of bombs, artillery shells, and landmines failed to detonate upon impact, sinking into the soft mud of rice paddies, burying themselves in jungle floors, and littering rural villages. When the military forces finally withdrew and the fighting ceased, this lethal harvest remained active just beneath the surface of the earth. Since the end of the conflict, tens of thousands of civilians have been killed or severely maimed by accidentally disturbing these hidden relics while farming, building homes, or simply playing outside. The presence of this unexploded ordnance has paralyzed economic development in massive regions, rendering fertile agricultural land completely unusable and forcing local communities to live in constant, everyday fear of a hidden explosion that could tear their lives apart in an instant. Number 1. The execution of Nguyen Vien Lam. A single, brutal moment caught on film completely altered the global perception of the conflict and demonstrated the raw, unvarnished violence of the war. During the chaos of the Tet Offensive in Saigon, a captured National Liberation Front captain named Nguyen Vern Lim was brought before South Vietnamese Brigadier General Nguyen C. Loan on a crowded public street. Without hesitation, a formal trial, or a single word of questioning, the general calmly drew his revolver and shot the bound prisoner directly through the head at point-blank range. The precise instant of the bullet entering the man's skull was captured by AP photographer Eddie Adams and television news cameras. The shocking image of an Allied officer executing a defenseless captive in cold blood instantly went viral across the globe, cutting through official military propaganda and exposing the raw, messy brutality of the conflict, deeply wounding the moral justification for the entire war effort.